She did not cry when he said it. That was the part she remembered most clearly, years later. Not the words themselves, but the stillness that came over her the moment they landed. It was a Wednesday. The candles on the dining table had burned low, and the rain was coming down hard against the windows of Ashmore Hall. There were 7 people at the table. She counted them afterward, the way one counts things when trying to hold on to something solid. 7 people, and not one of them said a word. Rowena Fitch set down her soup spoon without a sound. Her husband, Mr. Desmond Fitch, had not even looked at her when he said it. He had been addressing his sister, Mrs. Pauline Cruz, as though Rowena were a piece of furniture he had grown tired of. Something about the portrait, something about the East Parlor, and whether the new one should go up before Christmas. And then, almost as an afterthought, almost lazily, it hardly matters which wall. Nothing in that room is particularly worth looking at. His eyes had drifted to her for just a moment, just long enough. She understood perfectly. Pauline had laughed. A small, practiced sound, the kind of laugh that pretended it had heard something charming. The others shifted in their chairs. Old Mr. Fitch, Desmond's father, cleared his throat and reached for his wine. The housekeeper moved through the room as though she had not heard, and perhaps she had not, but Rowena knew from the careful set of the woman's shoulders that she had heard everything. Rowena picked up her spoon again. She finished her soup. She asked whether anyone would like more bread, and when no one answered, she folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate, with the same quiet precision she applied to everything in that house. She had been doing that for 2 years, applying quiet precision to things, learning where her edges were, learning which rooms were safe and which ones were not, learning to read Desmond the way one reads weather, which silences meant leave him alone, which moods meant the evening would be long. She had become very good at it, the way a person becomes good at anything they practice without ever choosing to. The marriage had not been her idea. That was the honest truth of it, though she would not have said so aloud, not in that house. Her father, Mr. Arlen Prentice, had agreed to the arrangement when she was 20, and she had not argued because arguing had never been something she was raised to do. The Fitch family had money and standing, and her family had land and debt, and that was the arithmetic of it. Desmond had been polite enough at first. Not warm, but polite. She had told herself that was something. By the time she understood it was not, she was already living in his house, sleeping in the room they had prepared for her, calling herself Mrs. Fitch in correspondence she wrote with her own hand. She walked upstairs after dinner, with the same measured step she always used. Desmond had stayed below with his father and Frances, a cousin who came and went without pattern. She could hear them talking as she climbed, the low rumble of male conversation, easy and unhurried, the kind of conversation that didn't require anything of anyone. Her room, the room she used as her own, though it was connected to Desmond's by a shared corridor, was cold. She didn't ring for the fire to be tended. She sat at the small writing desk near the window and looked out at the dark garden and the rain moving through it, and she did not think about what had been said at dinner. She thought instead about her mother. Mrs. Prentice had written 2 weeks ago, a letter full of the careful brightness her mother used when she suspected things were not well, and did not want to make them worse. "How is the house?" she had asked. "How is the countryside? How is Mr. Fitch?" Her mother always called him Mr. Fitch, never Desmond, as though the formality were a kind of protection. Rowena had written back that the house was beautiful. It was. And that the countryside was quiet. It was. And that Mr. Fitch was busy with the estate. That last part was also true. Everything she had written was true. She had simply not written the other things. She opened her desk drawer and took out a piece of paper. She did not write anything on it that night. She only held it for a moment, then put it back. She slept poorly. She had slept poorly for most of 2 years, waking in the small hours with the feeling that she had forgotten something important, some task she had left undone. By the time she remembered, there was nothing to remember. No forgotten task, only the ordinary shape of her life. It was usually too late to fall back asleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain ease off and thought, not for the first time, that she had made herself very small inside this house. That she had trimmed herself down, corner by corner, until she fit the space they had assigned her. She thought about the woman she had been at 20, arriving at Ashmore Hall for the first time in a hired coach with 3 trunks, and a small watercolor of the sea that her grandmother had left her. She had hung the watercolor in her room. It was still there, above the writing desk. She looked at it sometimes the way a person looks at an object they are afraid to move, afraid of what the space beneath it might reveal. She had been a different shape at 20. She remembered that. In the morning, Desmond came to find her in the library before breakfast. This was unusual. He rarely sought her out. Their lives in the house ran along parallel tracks that occasionally touched at meals and social engagements, and the formal management of the household, which Rowena oversaw with the same careful efficiency she applied to everything. He stood in the doorway rather than coming in, which she had noticed was something he did when he was uncertain. For all his carelessness, Desmond Fitch was a man who disliked uncertainty, and he handled it by hovering at the edges of rooms. "I trust you slept well," he said. She was looking at the shelf nearest the window, running her finger along the spines of books that had been in his family for generations. She did not turn around immediately. "Well enough," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Pauline found the evening rather enjoyable. She speaks highly of your arrangement of the table." Rowena turned then, because it would have been stranger not to. She looked at him, at the careful blankness of his face, at the way his hands were clasped behind his back, the posture of a man delivering a report. He was not unkind, she thought. Not precisely. He was simply someone who had never been asked to extend himself toward another person, and he had accepted that limitation as a feature of his character rather than a failure of it. "I'm glad she enjoyed herself," Rowena said. He nodded. He seemed about to say something else, then thought better of it. He wished her a good morning and left. She stood in the library for a long time after he had gone. The letter arrived 3 days later. It came addressed to her in the handwriting of her father's solicitor, a man named Mr. Greer, whom she had met twice and found to be the sort of person who delivered difficult news without any particular delicacy. She recognized the handwriting before she recognized the seal, and she felt something shift in her chest before she even opened it. Her father had died. He had been unwell for some months, the letter explained, and she had not been told. She learned this only by reading between the careful formal lines of the letter, because her mother had not wanted to worry her, and by the time anyone had thought to write, there was nothing left to write but this. She read the letter twice standing in the entrance hall, still in her morning dress, before she sat down on the bottom step of the staircase because there was nothing else to sit on, and her legs had decided they were finished holding her up. She did not make a sound. Desmond was in his study. The housekeeper was somewhere in the back of the house. The footman who had brought her the letter had retreated with the careful discretion of servants, who know they have delivered something terrible and don't want to be nearby when it arrives. Rowena sat on the step and looked at the letter in her hands. She had not seen her father in 8 months. The last visit had been in spring, when the countryside was just beginning to green and her father had walked her through the old kitchen garden and talked about the land the way he always had, as though it were a living thing with its own moods and demands. He had seemed thin to her, but he had waved off her concern the way he waved off most things he found inconvenient. She had let him. Desmond found her still sitting there an hour later. He had come out to ask about a letter he was expecting from his solicitor. She learned this later, when she had the clarity to reconstruct the morning, and he had stopped at the sight of her on the step with her father's letter still open in her hands. Rowena. The use of her name startled her. He rarely used it. "My father has died," she said. What followed was the most careful conversation she had ever had with her husband. He expressed condolences. He asked whether she wished to travel home, to her mother's house, which was now her mother's house alone, in the village of Hale, 4 days north. He offered to make arrangements. He said all the right things, she thought, in the right order, like a man reciting from a text he had studied. She thanked him. She said she would need a day to prepare. She spent that day sitting at her writing desk, answering the letter and writing to her mother, and somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between one letter and the next, she made a decision so quietly that she almost didn't notice she had made it. She was going to go home, and she was not sure she was coming back. She packed 3 trunks, which was everything she had arrived with, and rather a lot of what she had accumulated in 2 years of living in Desmond Fitch's house. The housekeeper, a steady woman named Mrs. Thorne, oversaw the packing without comment, though Rowena noticed that she moved through the task with a particular thoughtfulness, as though she understood that this was not an ordinary trip. Rowena took the small watercolor of the sea off the wall above the writing desk. She wrapped it herself in a square of cloth she had kept from a shawl her grandmother had once worn, and she placed it in the trunk on top of everything else. She had breakfast with Desmond the morning she left. They sat at opposite ends of the long table in the dining room, and they spoke about the weather and the road conditions north, and whether the coach spring was reliable, and she thought, watching him cut his toast with that methodical precision of his, that she might look back on this breakfast as the last ordinary thing. She did not know how she felt about that. She felt a great many things, most of them arranged below the level at which she could name them. "Right when you arrive," Desmond said, when the coach had been brought around and her trunks were loaded. "I will," she said. He offered his hand. She shook it, and then felt the absurdity of that, shaking her husband's hand at the door of his own house. And something about the absurdity of it anchored her, gave her something to stand on. She climbed into the coach and did not look back as they pulled away down the drive. The 4 days north were slow and cold, and she spent most of them looking out the window at the country going by, at the farmhouses, and the bare winter fields, and the occasional village, with its single church, and its handful of lit windows at dusk. She slept in coaching inns and ate what was put in front of her, and did not think too carefully about what she was doing. She was very practiced at not thinking too carefully. Her mother was waiting at the door of Prentice House when the coach arrived. She was smaller than Rowena remembered. Or perhaps grief had made her smaller, the way grief sometimes did, pressing people down into themselves. She took Rowena's hands and held them without speaking, and Rowena stood on the front step of the house, where she had grown up, and felt something in her chest that had been held very tightly for a very long time begin, very slowly, to ease. She stayed. The first week was for grief, and then the second week was also for grief. And the third week she walked through all the rooms of her father's house, and sat in his chair in the study, and looked at the maps he had kept on the wall, surveys of the land, some of them older than her, and tried to understand what she had come home to. What she had come home to was complicated. Her father had not been a careless man, but the years had worn the estate down in ways that careful attention alone could not fix. There were debts of the quiet variety, not catastrophic, but present, pressing in at the edges. There were tenants who needed things. There were fences that needed mending, and a section of the north field that had been left fallow 3 seasons running because no one had made a decision about it. Rowena made decisions about it. She had not realized, until she was back in this house, how much she had missed making decisions that mattered. At Ashmore Hall, she had made decisions about dinner menus, and which rooms to air, and which invitations to accept. Here she sat with the estate manager, a weathered man named Mr. Poole, who had worked for her father for 20 years, and who looked at her, that first meeting, with an expression of careful appraisal. She looked back at him with the same expression. By the end of the meeting they had reached an understanding. She wrote to Desmond regularly. Brief letters, factual. Her mother was well. The estate was being attended to. She was not ready to set a date for her return. He wrote back with equal brevity. The house was quiet. He hoped she was comfortable. He asked no questions she would have found difficult to answer. 6 weeks passed this way. She was in the kitchen garden, the same kitchen garden she had walked through with her father the previous spring, when she heard the coach arrive. She was not expecting anyone. She had her work gloves on, and her hem was muddy, and her hair was pulled back in the practical way she had adopted since coming home, without the careful arrangements that Ashmore Hall seemed to require. She heard Mrs. Poole, the estate manager's wife, who came in twice a week to help her mother, call out from the direction of the front of the house. She heard the sound of wheels on the gravel drive. She pulled off one glove and then the other, slowly, and walked around the side of the house. The coach was Desmond's. He was standing beside it when she came around the corner, still in his traveling coat, looking at the front of the house with the expression she had learned to recognize as his version of uncertainty. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. He saw the muddy hem, the pulled-back hair, the work gloves she was still holding in one hand. She saw him take all of that in. She did not fix any of it. "Desmond," she said. "Rowena." He cleared his throat. "I should have written first." "I know that. You should have," she agreed. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face she had not seen before, or perhaps had not allowed herself to look for. She waited because she had learned that Desmond Fitch, for all his self-possession, needed time to arrive at things. "I spoke with Pauline," he said, finally. "After you left, she said something to me." He stopped. Tried again. "She told me what she had found amusing at dinner, what she had laughed at." Rowena said nothing. "I had not understood," he said, "until she said it back to me plainly, what the evening must have looked like from." He stopped again. His jaw moved. "I do not offer that as an excuse. I offer it only as the truth. I was not attending to the right things." The wind came through the bare branches of the oak tree at the corner of the drive. It was a cold afternoon, the kind that smelled like the edge of something. "No," Rowena said. "You were not." He nodded slowly. He seemed to have expected that. "I would like." He reached into his coat and she saw he was holding something, a small flat package wrapped in brown paper. "I would like to discuss the terms on which you might consider returning. If returning is something you are willing to consider. He held out the package. This was delivered to Ashmore Hall shortly after you left. It is addressed to you. She crossed the gravel and took it from him. She did not open it immediately. She looked at it in her hands, her name, in a handwriting she recognized as her father's solicitor's, and felt the familiar shift in her chest. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." He followed her in. Her mother met them in the entry hall and looked at Desmond Fitch with the careful, assessing look of a woman who has been watching her daughter from 4 days away and has drawn her own conclusions. She said she would have tea sent in and disappeared in the direction of the kitchen, which Rowena recognized as a gesture of deliberate privacy. They sat in the study, she and Desmond, in the 2 chairs her father had kept angled toward the window. She opened the package. It was a letter from Mr. Greer, the solicitor. Her father, it seemed, had updated his will in the last year of his life, and there was a portion of the northern land, 40 acres of the old Prentice holding that had been tied up in a trust since before she was born, that was now to pass to her directly. Not to her husband, to her. She read it twice. She set it on her knee. "You've read this," she said. "No," Desmond said. "It came addressed to you. I brought it as it was." She looked at him. She believed him. She looked out the window at the kitchen garden, at the bare winter beds she had been working through all morning, at the fence her father had built along the eastern edge when she was a girl. 40 acres. The north field she had been trying to figure out what to do with. She knew exactly what to do with it. "I will tell you what I am willing to consider," she said. He sat very still. "I will consider returning," she said, "on the condition that I am consulted about the household and the estate in a manner that is actual consultation, not courtesy. I will manage the household as I have been managing it, but my decisions will be my own. I will not be an ornament, Desmond. I was not raised to be one, and I am not interested in learning." He did not interrupt. "I will also keep what my father has left me," she said. "Under my own management, that is not negotiable." "I did not intend to suggest it was," he said. "You have not suggested anything yet. I am telling you so that it is clear before anything else is said." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a bird settled in the oak tree and then departed. "I understand," he said, and I seem to choose the next words with care, the way he did not always do. "I have spent 6 weeks in a house that I had not noticed was quiet until it became too quiet. I do not know how to. Try it again. I am not practiced at this." "I know," Rowena said. "I noticed. I should like to become better at it." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the watercolor of the sea, still wrapped in the square fair of cloth at the top of her trunk upstairs. She thought about the kitchen garden and the north field, and the estate manager, Mr. Poole, who had looked at her that first morning with careful appraisal and arrived at an understanding. She thought about the girl she had been at 20, arriving at Ashmore Hall with her edges intact. Before she had learned to trim them. She was not that girl anymore. She was not sure she wanted to be, but she was not Mrs. Fitch of Ashmore Hall, either, not the version of Mrs. Fitch she had become, the one who folded her napkin precisely and asked if anyone wanted more bread. She was something that did not have a name yet. She was still in the process of finding out what. "Tea will be getting cold," she said. Desmond Fitch, for the first time in 2 years of marriage, almost smiled. She poured. She poured with the same steady hand she had always had, and she did not rush it, and she did not look at him while she did it. But when she handed him his cup she met his eyes directly in a way she had not always done, and he took it from her the way a man takes something he understands, now, not to be ordinary. Her mother came in with the shortbread her father had always liked, and sat in the 3rd chair as though she had always meant to be there. And the afternoon light came through the window at the low winter angle that turns everything briefly golden before it goes. Rowena drank her tea. She did not decide anything else that day. She did not need to. The decision had already been made, in the kitchen garden, the moment she had heard the coach on the gravel, and pulled off her gloves slowly, one and then the other, and walked around the side of the house without fixing anything. She had been exactly herself. She intended to stay that way.